The Flames. History's greatest secret and key to a future where ships travel lifetimes to bring flames to new worlds. Those who dare to walk the fire can cross between the stars with a step if you can find a ferryman and pay your way across. For most who brave the flame alone are lost forever. May the ferryman take you. 3 Talents and a Good Nose. Part 3. You're sterile. Not just this man who spun on Stan and snarled. Not just Telford whose face turned to stone at the words. All of Kelder was sterile. You said 5, Worm. The ferryman's youth and beauty returned phoenix-like on each walk through the flame, but his heart and mind were centuries old. Stan sometimes feared his kind more, alien than human, and the most soul-wrenching horrors he had fought for the church had been born of that breed. So it surprised Stan that such a creature, closer to God than to mortal man, was the one who broke the furious silence that followed the word sterile. You said Kelder had spawned 5 generations in just 70 years. The very human disgust on Tran's face renewed Stan's faith in its kind. What have you sick animals done to your gene pool? Telford stepped closer to Tran. Stan swallowed a curse and recalculated. It would take at least 6 blows to hack his people clear of danger now. Stan circled behind the tender, hoping the movement would catch Tran's eyes. It did not. This from an abomination. Telford's voice was flat. His head tilted as he examined the ferryman. Our world tests us faster, kills us faster. But we Kelder men are unbowed. There were murmurs from the distant crowd. The robed old men on the steps were backing away. Perhaps they'd wised up to Tender Frank's true sex, Stan thought. Oh, I'd say the ferryman hit the mark on this one, Frank said, her voice scornful, but Stan heard notes of the same pleasant surprise that he felt. Then the scorn drove out the wonder. A planet of heavy metals? Makes sense they kill you faster here. Maybe it makes your DNA break down a little every fast generation. Didn't see that coming when you blew out your flame, did you? Stan watched 6 very large men climb the stairs and clamped his hands around Frank's right bicep. He tugged her back from the Kelder. Time to go, Stan telegraphed with a look. Telford stiffened. It is not for us to mule about our fates. You see only a barren world, not the strength or purity a life here demands. Again, Tran stalked closer to Telford. It's not the terrain that makes this world ugly. Stan's eyes grew wide with genuine terror as the ferryman poked Telford in the chest. It's not even that you're impotent or your DNA's broke. Tran poked again. Why aren't there any women here, Worm? Yes, where are they? Tender Franks echoed Tran. Why was she resisting, Stan wondered, as the woman strained against him. No, look me in the eye, she shouted when the Kelder and Telford glanced sideways at each other. Tender Franks, Stan hissed. Heavy boots were pounding up the steps now. Telford heard them too and smiled at Stan. We have to leave. No, you will stay, the Kelder taunted Franks. If you won't see reason now, I'll put you somewhere safe and sound until your church sends someone else along. Hopefully someone more suitable, he breathed. Someone with a big swinging Y chromosome, you mean? Tran taunted. Doubt he'd recognize anything on this raucous male. The heavy boots hit the top step and came to parade rest in lockstep. Stan took in their gray pants and loose jackets and black boots, all exactly the same, all moving as a unit. That's right. The Kelder saw Stan's look and the Tender's own. Come along like a good girl, he jeered. Or we'll see just how tender we can make you. Franks shook Stan's hand loose and stared up, a smile forming. There won't be another offer of aid from my church. You want our help? You'll have to earn it. From me, Kelder, from me. The old man laughed. We should bow to you? He jerked his hand at Tran. To it? No. Telford. Sir, the other replied, his eyes dancing from body to body, target to target, just as Stan's did. I've changed my mind. Give her what she wants. He leaned towards Franks and stage whispered, Show her where the women are. Franks leaned in, mirroring the Kelder. I don't need to see, she said in the same mocking whisper. Oh, and they won't be there long, she confided to him. You won't be here long either. To me, Telford called, and the line of boots advanced. Franks, Stan implored, torn between duty to church and protection. Enough of this, Tran said, unfazed by the Kelder's violent overtures as he turned back to the flame. Leave them to rot until they come crawling to us. Not yet, Franks said, standing her ground and turning to roar into the crowd and cameras. I am a tender of the Church of Flame. She raised both hands wide, cocking her hip again in that manufactured way, telegraphing her femininity for all those watching at home. We seek light and bring warmth. We lend comfort and fight the darkness. Stan counted steps and strikes. The soldiers may have been unarmed, but they were only 7 paces away from surrounding his people. Ah, hell. He changed his mind and stopped counting strikes. It was time to improvise. Finally, the tender lowered her hands and put her focus back on the Kelder. You've gone and made it pretty dark around here, Frank said, and then, at last, took 3 sudden steps back towards the flame. But since when does the flame burn black? The code word given, the bands of worry around Stan's chest evaporated. He grabbed 2 fistfuls of tender Frank's church robe and swung her hard around, sending her tumbling bodily towards the flame. Grab was all Telford managed to scream before the porcelain throwing blade Stan had been carrying between the knuckles of his right hand sliced into his larynx. The big man pressed a hand to the wound, staunching the spurt of blood, but still managed to stagger forward and grab Tran by the hair. The ferryman moved with liquid ease, tossing the stunned combatant down to the stone plinth, almost too fast for Stan to follow. He didn't bother trying. Instead, he whipped his hand out to catch Tran by the crook of his elbow with one hand and ripped 3 of the metal beads off of his stole with the other. Planting his feet, he yanked Tran backwards and poured the energy of the ferryman's motion through his hips and into his other arm, the ones holding the beads he'd torn from his stole. They flew through the air to land on the far side of the Kelder. On impact, they exploded with a flash and a shockwave that flung the old man back towards Stan and leveled all 6 of the men rushing to engage. Bring him, Frank shrieked behind him. Clamping his jaw so hard it cracked, Stan complied, dropping to one knee and grabbing the crawling and screaming Kelder by his long white hair. The beads from the other end of his stole exploded with another flash and concussive blast. But these ones went a step further. A thick, cloying wall of smoke engulfed the Kelder's men. Rage and terror from the distant mob joined the nearer sounds of pain, choking, and gagging, but it was all behind the smoke, and Stan was double-timing it back to the flame. He tugged the last beads from his stole and flung them to the far end of the plinth for good measure. Tran and Franks crouched in front of the flame. Both reached out for Stan, and as soon as their fingers found purchase, he was dragged off his feet. He held on to the blubbering old man, knitting his fist in the white hair and yanking harder for good measure as the flame swept over them. They only stayed in the probe long enough for the old man to throw up and for Tran to bounce his head off a bulkhead to put an end to his terrified bleeding. Stan double-checked with Franks, but she wasn't going to bend on this one. After the waves of heat passed next, the group left the unconscious leader to tumble down the ramp. Tran stepped over the Kelder and disappeared to do whatever ferrymen did when they weren't leading people through. Getting slow in your old age, Stan? Franks teased, panting, hands on her knees. Getting stupid in yours? Stan countered. The tender nodded. Might just be. Stan relented. Not without cause, he said, a touch more gently. He stretched, wincing as he felt a slice on the back of his shoulder. Stone chip from the plinth, he figured, and shuffled down the ramp. His debrief with church intelligence usually took half a day. Kelder was someone else's mess now, and the sooner he was done talking about the damned place, the better. "Do you ever feel that way?" Frank's voice called out to him as a medic rushed the way he'd come. He heard a tiny note of despair in it, but he pretended that he didn't. Frank's didn't need his shoulder to cry on, and besides, his hurt too much to lend it out right now. The Flamesmen had removed the reeking waste of skin from the base of the ramp by the time Stan reached it. He turned and looked up at the tender, poked and prodded now by the medic. "Like it burns black?" he grunted. "Sometimes. In here." He thumped his chest, then wearily waved toward the flame. "Never up there." "Thank you, Stan," Franks said in that important way it seemed only tenders could. "May it warm you and light your way always." He bowed and left. He wondered how many names he'd have to write this time. Intelligence would help him sort that out. Would the names fill the whole parchment? He'd find out soon enough. His home temple was only a walk away. After debrief, he'd cross, and if the flames couldn't warm him, he would let the flame caress his fingers a little longer during cindering. Walk the Fire by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Theme music, Full On by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Many of the stories you listen to at servingworlds.com were made possible by the support of patrons at patreon.com/servingworlds. If you like what you hear, please consider adding your support. Thank you for listening.